Now, for, of course, a discussion, we will be joined by Wits Law School visiting professor, Dr. Mia Swart, who will be joining us to look at some of these urgent interventions that are being called for, especially right now. They are being called for at a time where we still are none the wiser as to what's going to happen, particularly when it comes to those talks around a ceasefire. You listened to Sarah Coates earlier on, speaking about how, earlier on there was talk that these talks have deadlocked, and it doesn't look like that March 10 deadline could then be reached. And where does this then put these negotiations and that, possibility of announcing a possible ceasefire before the start of Ramadan? And I do understand that Dr. Swart is joining us live now. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's just start with, firstly, the developments around the fact that right now there is still no sign or even talk of an agreement around a ceasefire.
Yes, well, the issue of a ceasefire is now really the burning issue, and it doesn't seem like significant progress is being made on that front. We've seen, a disappointment after disappointment on the ceasefire front. We know that Israel has not even joined the talks in Cairo. The Cairo talks were attended by Qatar and Egypt, for example, but not by Israel, which in itself shows something. My sense is that Israel will continue with military action, certainly over the next days, certainly over the beginning of Ramadan, which is, of course, very concerning.
It could put itself, of course, against, one of its allies, the United States. And we're also even hearing this evening that, the U.S. President Joe Biden will use his State of the Union address to then be able to outline some of the measures that the United States is going to be taking to try and make sure that there is more aid that reaches the people of Gaza. But should then, Israel's ally, the U.S., pull out and decide not to support it further, what are some of the implications that could be seen on the ground in your view?
Well, first of all, I find it very unlikely that the US will distance itself from Israel completely. And I also think that this was really the time for the US to take such a principled stance and put pressure on Israel to stop its military action in Gaza. It has failed to do so. I mean, it's a positive sign that President Biden is increasingly becoming more critical of Israel. But when it comes to real pressure, to exerting the kinds of pressure that could actually stop the action, the military action, he has not done so. So I find it extremely unlikely that the US will distance itself completely from Israel, as you are suggesting.
And let's then also look at, the fact that right now South Africa has approached, the International Court of Justice again to try and prevent a catastrophic famine on the ground. And this is one of those issues that has been talked about over time, especially when it comes to not only aid, but the protection of, the people on the ground as well. How significant is this move in your view?
Well, it's important that South Africa, keeps trying to do something at least, in contrast with many other countries, that we are trying at least to get the ICJ to amend its initial order or to make additional provisional orders. It's very, very unlikely that the court would do so, in my opinion. There's very little precedent for this. Also, it's unlikely that the court will do so quickly enough to prevent possible carnage over the next days, and particularly in the start of the Ramadan. We know that man-made famine is a war crime and a form of genocide, is very serious, and that this is what is happening in Gaza now. It is absolutely preventable famine, and it's famine that constitutes genocide.
And especially when you look at the fact that, as these talks continue, there are still, the real concerns about what is happening on the ground. You think about the fact that, for example, over 100 people being killed when they were trying to approach an aid truck, and we saw what happened there. And we also continue to see what is happening on the ground as well. The UN also releasing that report of, what has been happening through as they dug deeper into what happened on October 7th to some of the hostages as well. This desperate situation on the ground continues just as these talks are continuing and the real threat to human life continues.
That is correct. I think Israel really showed its true colors when it, attacked those people who were running for the food aid. I think that, the fact that so many women and children were killed, I mean, this really shows the most malicious intent, and I very much, despair in terms of the next few days and in terms of the prospect for a ceasefire.
And one wonders if this, this March 10 deadline will be met at all, and see if anything can actually happen on the ground, because a lot of people are pinning their hopes on these talks to see if the needle will move somewhat. But thank you so much for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. That was Wits Law School visiting Professor Mia Swart.